Now, we tried this version of Tom Sawyer. We tried to see whether there was something that we could move from being pleasurable to displeasurable and the other way around. And we chose to think of my ability to recite poetry. So I came to a group of students, and I recited them a particular piece of poetry from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Whoever you are, holding me now in hand, without one thing, all will be useless. I give you fair warning before you attempt me further. I am not what you suppose, but far different. Who is he that would become my follower? Who would sign himself as a candidate for my affection? The way is suspicious, the result uncertain, perhaps destructive. You would have to give up all else. I alone would expect to be your sole and exclusive standard. And after reciting a little bit of poetry, I said, you know what, on Friday, I'm going to have a poetry recital. And I'm going to have 3 poetry recitals. Short, middle length, and long one. And then I said, look, I don't have space for all of you. This was a very big class. I only have space for a few. So I'm going to have an auction procedure for you to decide who would get into the recital and who would not. And I gave people a sheet of paper to submit their bids. But for some people, I said in the beginning, before you start, tell me hypothetically whether you would be willing to pay $10 to listen to Professor Ariely recite poetry for 5 minutes. And then they said yes or no, and then they said how much they would pay for the short, medium, and long recital. To other people, it was the same thing, but we said, hypothetically, before we start, tell me whether you would be willing to listen to Professor Ariely recite poetry for 5 minutes if we paid you $10. What happened? The people who we asked them about willing to pay, paying $10, were willing to pay. The people we asked them about we paying them wanted to listen only if we paid them. So what happened is that people don't know if me reciting poetry is good or bad, and we can change their understanding based on the first question. And what about longer poetry reading? They just went in the same direction. So if somebody thought about it in the negative direction, that they should be paid, then they thought they should be paid for longer poetry reading more. And if somebody thought it was positive, they're willing to pay more for longer poetry readings. So the fact is that people don't know, for example here, if this is good or bad, but once they decide, everything becomes coherent, everything becomes sensible within that range.